She walked into the gala in a simple dress, with a piglet in her arms. Laughter, sideways glances, and whispers started instantly. But no one there could imagine what that little pig would be capable of doing. Minutes later, the entire ballroom was silent until the applause came. Subscribe to our channel now and discover how a humble woman and her piglet stole the entire evening. Cedar Palace sparkled in the New York night. The immense gardens, illuminated by strategically positioned lights, created a dreamlike setting for the most exclusive charity event of the year. Imported cars paraded through the main entrance, depositing New York's elite onto the red carpet that extended to the main hall. Designer dresses, gleaming jewels, and rehearsed smiles composed the scene of opulence that characterized the Grand Spring Gala. Victoria Cartwright, socialite and event organizer, circulated among the guests with the grace of someone born for such an environment. Her 5-inch heels did not prevent her from floating across the Italian marble floor, distributing air kisses and comments about the decoration that had cost a small fortune. "Everything perfect, as always," complimented Gregory Mitchell, AT, real estate entrepreneur and one of the main sponsors of the night. "You've exceeded all expectations this year, Victoria." "Darling, you know I don't settle for less than perfection," she replied, adjusting the emerald necklace that adorned her neck. "Besides, we need to maintain the standard. Tonight is about raising funds for the children, but also about showing that we know how to make things happen with class." While waiters served champagne in crystal flutes and musicians from the New York Philharmonic played Mozart in the background, no one imagined that the true star of the night was yet to arrive. That's when eyes began to converge toward the entrance of the ballroom. At first, there was a disconcerting silence, followed by whispers and barely contained chuckles. Victoria, noticing the change in atmosphere, turned to see what had caused such a commotion. Standing at the threshold was Mary Sanchez, a woman in her 40s, black hair pulled back in a simple bun, wearing a light blue dress that, though clean and well pressed, clearly didn't bear the signature of any renowned designer. Her shoes were comfortable, practical, suitable for someone who spends a lot of time on her feet. But what really drew attention wasn't her appearance that stood out from the standard of the party. It was what accompanied her. By her side, attached to a handcrafted blue ribbon leash, came trotting a small piglet with light pink fur and black spots that seemed to form patterns on its back. The animal walked in a surprisingly elegant manner, as if aware of the refined environment in which it found itself. "Oh my God," whispered Victoria to Gregory. "Who let that person in? And with a pig?" Gregory adjusted his glasses to see better. "I think she has an invitation. Look, she's showing it to the security guard." Indeed, Mary was calmly presenting an official invitation to the security guard who, after verifying it, albeit with evident discomfort, allowed her entry. She thanked him with a serene smile and walked into the ballroom, followed by the piglet who maintained an almost dignified posture. As she advanced among the guests, a corridor naturally opened up. Some laughed discreetly, others didn't even bother to hide their disdain. Malicious comments could be heard without much effort. This must be some kind of joke. Who does she think she is to bring a farm animal to an event like this? Must be someone's new maid who got confused with the address. Mary, however, remained imperturbable, as if the comments didn't reach her. Her spine was straight, her gaze serene and her steps firm. The piglet, who answered to the name of Benny, accompanied her with surprising discipline. From across the ballroom, an elderly lady observed the scene with a discreet smile. Mrs. Eleanor Montgomery, widow of one of the country's greatest industrialists, watched Mary's movements with interest. It had been she who sent the invitation, although few knew this. The first demonstration of Benny's unusual behavior didn't take long to happen. A waiter, distracted by the whispers and glances directed at the strange duo, stumbled slightly, dangerously tilting a tray full of champagne flutes. Before disaster struck, Benny emitted a soft grunt, catching the young man's attention, who recovered his balance at the last moment. The small incident might have gone unnoticed, if not for the watchful eye of Richard Anderson, a journalist, covering the event for the Society column. Intrigued, he decided to observe the unusual guest and her pet more closely. Mary was walking calmly toward one of the canapé tables when she noticed an elderly lady trying unsuccessfully to reach one of the appetizers. Without any verbal command, Benny approached the table, stood up on his hind legs, to the astonishment of those present, and with impressive delicacy pushed the small plate of canapes closer to the edge, making it accessible for the lady. "Thank you very much," said the elderly woman, genuinely surprised. "What an intelligent little animal you have." "The pleasure is his, ma'am," replied Mary with a gentle smile. "Benny likes to help." The simple gesture did not go unnoticed by nearby guests, who exchanged intrigued glances. One thing was a well-behaved pig. Another entirely different was a pig that seemed to understand and anticipate human needs. Victoria, who observed everything from a distance, approached with a forced smile. As hostess, she felt obligated to address the situation before it completely escaped her control. "Good evening," she said with the most controlled voice she could employ. "I don't believe we've been introduced. I'm Victoria Cartwright, the organizer of this event." "Mary Sanchez," the woman responded simply, showing no intimidation. "And this is Benny." The piglet, as if understanding he was being introduced, slightly inclined his head in a sort of greeting that made Victoria instinctively step back. "I understand you have an invitation," continued Victoria, "but generally our guests are informed about the dress code and, well, about our policy of not allowing animals, especially pigs," completed Mary without losing her composure. "I understand your concern, Mrs. Cartwright, but Benny is not an ordinary animal, and we have special permission from Mrs. Montgomery to be here." Upon hearing Mrs. Montgomery's name, Victoria hesitated. The matriarch's influence was indisputable, and contradicting one of her wishes could have disastrous social consequences. Still, a pig at her gala. At that moment, a commotion in the center of the ballroom attracted everyone's attention. One of the guests, a businessman known for his explosive temperament, had accidentally spilled his drink on a socialite's extremely expensive dress. The woman was screaming, the man was apologizing, and waiters were rushing to minimize the disaster. In the midst of the confusion, no one noticed Benny discreetly moving away from Mary and approaching the scene. With surprising agility, he grabbed several napkins from a nearby sideboard and brought them to the lady, delicately depositing them at her feet. The gesture was so unexpected, so out of the ordinary, that the entire ballroom stopped to watch. The socialite, momentarily forgetting her anger, looked at the piglet in astonishment. Then, after a moment of hesitation, she picked up the napkins and began drying her dress, while looking incredulously at the animal that now calmly returned to his owner's side. "What just happened?" someone asked aloud. "Did that pig get napkins? To help? How is this possible?" The murmurs spread through the ballroom like wildfire. Suddenly, Mary and Benny were no longer objects of scorn, but of genuine curiosity. People began to approach, wanting to know more about the simple woman and her extraordinary pet. Curiosity took over the ballroom. What was once contempt now transformed into growing fascination. Groups of guests began to approach Mary, forming a small circle around her. Questions came from all sides, though she answered with the same serene simplicity that characterized her. "How long have you had this piglet? How did you manage to teach him to do these things? Is it some kind of training trick?" Mary answered patiently, never losing her composure or showing any trace of satisfaction for finally receiving positive attention. "Benny has been with me for 3 years. It's not exactly common training, it's more of a partnership." Meanwhile, Victoria Cartwright observed the scene with growing discomfort. Her meticulously planned party, meant to be the social event of the year, was being overshadowed by a simple woman and her pet pig. Discreetly, she approached Mrs. Montgomery, who watched everything with an enigmatic smile at the corner of her lips. "Mrs. Montgomery, with all due respect, do you know that woman? Was it really you who invited her to our event?" The elderly woman adjusted her gold-framed glasses and responded with the authority that her 85 years and social position conferred upon her. "Yes, dear. Mary is a very special person. To me, and that piglet too. But a pig at a charity gala? People were laughing, commenting, and now they're fascinated," completed Mrs. Montgomery, with an amused sparkle in her eyes. Sometimes we need something unexpected to shake our certainties, don't you think? Before Victoria could respond, a new incident attracted everyone's attention. Edward Morgan, CEO of one of the country's largest technology companies and known for his difficult temperament, had just dropped his Patek Philippe watch while gesturing during a conversation. The accessory, valued at more than $200,000, slipped under a table surrounded by guests. "Damn it," he exclaimed, awkwardly crouching in his Italian suit. "Can someone help me here?" Without anyone noticing how, Benny was already moving between the legs of the guests. With surprising agility for an animal of his species, he slipped under the table, momentarily disappearing from everyone's view. An expectant silence took over the group. Seconds later, the piglet reappeared, carefully pushing Edward's watch with his snout. Edward looked at the animal with a mixture of disbelief and relief. "This is extraordinary," he stammered as he picked up his Patek Philippe from the floor. Turning to Mary, who was calmly approaching, he asked, "How did he know what to do? How did he understand that I needed the watch?" Mary smiled. "Benny is very sensitive to people's needs. He perceives when someone is in difficulty and tries to help in the way he can. This is simply amazing," commented a famous fashion designer who was observing the scene. "I've never seen anything like it." News of the helpful piglet spread quickly through the ballroom. Guests who had previously avoided Mary now approached, wanting to meet Benny and see him in action. Some even tried to test his abilities, deliberately dropping small objects, which the piglet promptly retrieved. Amid the growing admiration, there was one person who did not share the general enthusiasm. Paul Montgomery, an agribusiness entrepreneur and the night's main donor, observed the scene with visible displeasure. For him, a pig was just a production animal, not a pet that should frequent refined environments. "This is ridiculous," he commented to his circle of friends. "We're at a charity gala, not an agricultural fair. What's next? Will they bring a cow to the auction?" The laughter of his companions caught the attention of other guests, including Mary, who noticed the scorn directed at her and Benny. For the first time that night, something resembling discomfort passed across her face, but was quickly replaced by her usual serenity. "Some will never understand," commented Richard, the journalist who continued to follow the movements of the unusual duo, "for they're too attached to their own conceptions of value." "It's all right," replied Mary. "We didn't come here to please everyone, just to fulfill a promise." "Promise?" asked Richard, his journalistic instinct immediately aroused. "What kind of promise?" Before Mary could answer, Mrs. Montgomery approached, supported by her carved wooden cane. "Mary, dear, it's time. I'd like to make the announcement now." The two women exchanged a complicit look, and Mary nodded. Mrs. Montgomery gestured to the master of ceremonies, who immediately headed to the microphone at the center of the stage set up in the ballroom. "Ladies and gentlemen, may I have your attention, please? Mrs. Eleanor Montgomery would like to make a special announcement." The buzz in the ballroom gradually diminished until a respectful silence settled. Mrs. Montgomery was a figure of immense respect in New York society, not only for her considerable fortune, but mainly for her philanthropic trajectory. With Richard's help, the elderly woman climbed onto the stage. Although her steps were slow and calculated, there was an unwavering determination in her movements. Upon reaching the microphone, she smiled at the audience. "My dear friends, I am very happy to see so many familiar faces tonight, united for a cause as noble as the education of our children. As you know, over the years I have dedicated much of my life to social causes, firmly believing that our true wealth lies in the good we do for others." Murmurs of approval ran through the ballroom as guests exchanged looks of admiration. "Tonight," continued Mrs. Montgomery, "I want to introduce you to someone very special, someone who, with infinitely fewer resources than ours, has been doing work that deserves not only recognition but our effective support." She made an inviting gesture toward Mary, who hesitated for a moment before walking toward the stage, with Benny faithfully accompanying her. "This is Mary Sanchez," announced Mrs. Montgomery as the woman climbed onto the stage. "Many of you have already had the opportunity to meet her tonight, as well as her extraordinary companion, Benny. Some nervous laughter ran through the audience, but was quickly silenced by Mrs. Montgomery's firm gaze. What few know is that Mary is responsible for a revolutionary project of animal-assisted therapy, aimed especially at elderly people with reduced mobility and children with special needs. The revelation provoked a murmur of surprise among the guests. The image of the simple woman began to gain new dimensions in everyone's eyes. "A year ago," continued Mrs. Montgomery with a slightly choked voice, "I suffered a serious fall that severely compromised my mobility. The doctors were not optimistic about my chances of walking again without assistance. That's when my granddaughter discovered Mary's work in Albany, upstate New York." At that moment, Paul Montgomery, who observed the scene with growing irritation, decided it was time to intervene. He walked with firm steps toward the stage, interrupting Mrs. Montgomery's speech. "With all due respect, Mrs. Montgomery," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "but we are at a serious charity event. I understand that you have your eccentricities, but turning our gala into a circus with trained pigs seems too much even by this city's standards." An embarrassed silence took over the ballroom. Victoria Cartwright seemed about to faint, torn between the horror of seeing her event ruined and the fear of contradicting both Paul Montgomery and Mrs. Montgomery. It was at this critical moment that Benny, as if perfectly understanding the tension of the situation, moved. To everyone's astonishment, the piglet approached Paul Montgomery and, with surprising delicacy, deposited something at his feet. It was a small golden object that gleamed under the ballroom lights, the gold cufflink with the initials PM engraved, which had come loose from the businessman's shirt cuff without him noticing. Paul Montgomery looked at the small golden object at his feet, his expression of disdain gradually transforming into surprise. He stooped to pick up the personalized cufflink, turning it between his fingers with an expression that mixed perplexity and embarrassment. The silence in the ballroom was almost palpable, as all eyes alternated between the disconcerted businessman and the small pig that calmly returned to Mary's side. "My gold cufflink," muttered Paul, examining the object. "I didn't even notice it had fallen." A slight murmur ran through the ballroom, followed by some hesitant applause that soon transformed into a genuine ovation. It wasn't just for the piglet's action, but for the evident symbolism of the situation. The animal that Paul had ridiculed had just done him a service, recovering a valuable object that he didn't even know he had lost. Mrs. Montgomery, with the E. Dignity of someone who has lived long enough not to be easily impressed by human vanities, just smiled. "As I was saying before Benny's interesting demonstration," she continued, without showing any irritation for the interruption, "I was one of the many people benefited by Mary's extraordinary work. When I met her, I could barely move without help after my fall. The doctors talked about intensive physiotherapy, surgical interventions, and a recovery that could take years, with no guarantees of success." Mrs. Montgomery paused, her eyes watery with contained emotion. "Mary and Benny changed my life. Through daily exercises assisted by this incredible animal, I regained not only my mobility, but my joy for living." The revelation caused a commotion in the ballroom. The image of the powerful matriarch of the Montgomery family, weakened after an accident and recovered thanks to animal therapy, humanized the one many saw only as an icon of economic power. "That's why," continued Mrs. Montgomery, "I decided that the announcement of the donation I'm making tonight should be made in the presence of Mary and Benny. I'm allocating $5 million for the construction of New York's first animal-assisted therapy center, which will bear the name of my late husband." The applause was immediate and enthusiastic. Victoria Cartwright, realizing that the course of the night had changed dramatically, hurried to climb onto the stage to embrace Mrs. Montgomery and Mary, as if she had planned that moment from the beginning. "What a wonderful surprise," she exclaimed with her most radiant smile. "This is exactly the kind of innovative initiative our gala seeks to support." Mary, still serene but visibly moved, finally took the floor. "I thank you for your trust, Mrs. Montgomery. This support will allow our work to reach many more people in need." Paul Montgomery, still at the foot of the stage, seemed torn between embarrassment and curiosity. After a moment of hesitation, he climbed the steps and approached Mary. "I apologize for my behavior," he said, with a sincerity that surprised even his closest friends. "I was prejudiced and rude. I would like to better understand how this work that you develop functions." Mary nodded, accepting the apology with the same dignity with which she had faced the initial contempt. "I'll be happy to explain, Mr. Montgomery. In fact, it all started quite accidentally. It was then that Mary shared her story with all those present. Born to a humble family in rural Virginia, she had moved to New York at 18 to work as a caregiver for the elderly. Years later, upon returning to the small town of Oak Ridge to care for her sick mother, she found Benny, at the time just an abandoned piglet on a rural road. "He was injured and malnourished," she explained. "I couldn't leave him there. I took him home and cared for him." The animal's recovery coincided with the worsening of her mother's health condition, who suffered from severe rheumatoid arthritis. It was by chance that Mary noticed how her mother seemed more willing to move when Benny was nearby, trying to reach him or pet him. "I realized she was making movements that she normally avoided because of the pain. Benny's presence motivated her in a way that no medical stimulus had managed to." Intrigued, Mary began to develop small exercises, using Benny as an incentive for her mother to perform specific movements. The results were so promising that she began to formally study animal-assisted therapy while training Benny to respond to increasingly complex commands. When my mother significantly improved, we began to help other elderly people in the neighborhood. The news spread, and soon we had a small improvised clinic in our home. It was at this clinic that Mrs. Montgomery's granddaughter discovered Mary's work while researching alternative treatments for her grandmother, who refused to be admitted to a conventional hospital after her fall. "At first I thought the idea was absurd," confessed Mrs. Montgomery, taking the floor again. "A pig as a therapist? It sounded like a made-up story, but I was desperate enough to try anything." Mary was invited to temporarily move to the Montgomery mansion, bringing Benny with her. In a few months, the results were visible. Mrs. Montgomery went from a wheelchair to a cane, gradually regaining her independence. "What Mary does isn't magic. It's science applied with love," explained Mrs. Montgomery. "She combines knowledge of physiotherapy, occupational therapy, and animal behavior in a way that I had never seen before." As Mary's story was shared, the gala guests looked at Benny with new eyes. What before seemed just an out-of-place animal was now seen as a four-legged therapist, trained to help people in vulnerable situations. "The most impressive thing," continued Mary, "is that Benny seems to have a natural sensitivity to identify needs. Many of the behaviors you saw today, like helping that lady reach the canapes or retrieving fallen objects, were not explicitly taught. He developed these skills by observing and interacting with people." Richard, the journalist who was attentively following everything, couldn't contain his curiosity. "And why a pig? Why not a dog, as is more common in assisted therapies?" Mary smiled. "That's a question many ask. The truth is that each species has its advantages. Dogs are wonderful and widely used, but pigs like Benny have a unique intelligence. They can learn complex commands, have excellent memory, and are surprisingly empathetic. Besides, for patients with allergies or fear of dogs, a piglet like Benny is a perfect alternative." Paul Montgomery, now genuinely interested, asked, "And how many people have already benefited from your work?" "So far, we've assisted about 200 patients, mainly elderly people and children with special needs. With limited resources, our reach has been small, but the results are consistent. Assisted therapy improves not only physical mobility, but also emotional and cognitive aspects." The revelations about Mary's work completely transformed the atmosphere of the gala. What had begun as a night of social ostentation now gained a deeper purpose. Guests who had barely noticed the charitable cause behind the event now approached Victoria and Mrs. Montgomery, wanting to know how they could contribute to the new therapy center. "I believe this will be the most successful gala we've ever organized," commented Victoria, visibly moved. "And to think I almost prevented your entry." Mrs. Montgomery smiled. "Sometimes, Victoria, the greatest transformations come from the most unexpected places. Who would have imagined that a pet piglet could teach so much about empathy and value to some of New York's most privileged people? At the end of the night, as the guests said their goodbyes, many made a point of personally greeting Mary and even petting Benny, who received the attention with the same dignity he had demonstrated throughout the party. Paul Montgomery was one of the last to leave. He approached Mary with a thoughtful expression. "You know, I've always believed that value and elegance were defined by external things, expensive clothes, luxury objects, socially approved behaviors. Tonight made me question these certainties." Mary nodded, accepting the insight with the same dignity with which she had faced the initial contempt. "True elegance, Mr. Montgomery, is in how we treat those who can do nothing for us." "You and Benny taught me a valuable lesson," he replied, looking at the piglet who was resting peacefully at his owner's feet. "I hope you'll accept my invitation for a visit to my farm. I have some social projects in the region that could benefit from your experience." When the last guests departed, Mary, Benny, Mrs. Montgomery, and Victoria remained in the nearly empty ballroom. The luxurious decoration, which hours earlier had seemed so important, was now just scenery for something much more significant: the beginning of a transformation. "Thank you for convincing me to come, Mrs. Montgomery," said Mary, caressing Benny, who was dozing by her side. "I confess I was apprehensive." "I knew you would make an impact," replied the elderly woman with a mischievous smile. "Some people need to be shaken up from time to time, taken out of their comfort zones to see beyond appearances." Victoria, who had joined them, admitted, "When I saw you entering, I thought my party was ruined. Now I realize it only truly began at that moment." The three women observed the grand ballroom, now silent after hours of music, conversations, and revelations. Benny, as if feeling it was time to leave, stood up and looked expectantly at Mary. "It seems he knows our mission here is accomplished," she commented, smiling. As they left Cedar Palace, the New York night welcomed them with a gentle breeze. Mary looked at the starry sky, thinking about how a simple woman from the countryside and her pet piglet had, for one night, transformed the values of some of the city's most influential people. "Tomorrow will be a new day, Benny," she whispered to her faithful companion, "and we have a lot of work ahead of us." Dear listeners, we hope the story of Mary and Benny has touched your hearts. To continue this journey of emotions, we've prepared a special playlist with equally captivating stories about simple people who transform lives. Find it here by clicking on the left. If you enjoyed this narrative about true values and deceptive appearances, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and like the video. Every day we bring unique stories that explore the complexity of American life and make us reflect on what really matters. Share your thoughts and experiences in the comments. We'd love to know if you've ever witnessed situations where someone's true value was revealed beyond appearances.